Pollution has become an enormous problem around the world. In fact, I have come to refer to it as the world's largest environmental risk factor. It's also a very neglected risk factor. It doesn't get anywhere near the attention that it should, and I think that's because it's grown quietly and crept up on us. But we've learned through the work of the Commission on Health that pollution is responsible for 9 million deaths per year. That's 3 times more than AIDS, malaria, and TB put together. It's more deaths than tobacco. Tobacco is responsible for about 7 million deaths around the world each year. So it's a big, big problem. 2/3 of the problem is air, indoor air plus outdoor air pollution, and the remaining third is a combination of water pollution, soil pollution at contaminated sites like smelters, and the whole gamut of chemical pollutants. It costs about 2% of GDP in well-developed countries and up to 7% of GDP in poor, rapidly industrializing countries. I think the reason that pollution has been ignored for so long is that it doesn't come from any one place. Some of it comes from industry, some of it comes from mining, quite a bit of it comes out of the tailpipes of cars, a lot of it comes from coal-fired electric power plants, but it's not any one place. And so the international community and governments have tended to deal with it piecemeal and not as a single entity. Another problem has been the fact that in most governments and also in most universities and also in the press and popular thinking, human health and the environment live in 2 separate silos. And the third big factor, which cannot be ignored, is that unlike, let's say, salmonella, there's a very powerful lobby behind chemical pollution, or actually a family of lobbies who do not want controls to be imposed upon pollution and fight vigorously whenever governments attempt to impose controls. So broadly speaking, our Commission on Pollution divided pollution into two broad categories. One kind we called traditional pollution, which is the pollution that arises mainly at the household level, associated with deep poverty. The 2 types of pollution that fall into that category are household air pollution and water pollution. And the number of deaths from those 2 kinds of pollution are slowly coming down around the world. But at the same time, pollution that comes from modern industry is increasing around the world, and it's increasing most rapidly in rapidly emerging economies in East Asia, which means China, South Asia, India, and Bangladesh, and increasingly in Africa. So we have a whole melange of pollution problems where the levels of pollution are increasing, well-documented increases in level of pollution, and also well-documented increase in the number of deaths from pollution. And it's by no means over. Some very good projections have looked at trends over the next 35 years till 2050, and a pessimistic projection says that the number of deaths due to air pollution is going to increase by 50% by 2050. A second analysis, which is a tad more optimistic, says that if aggressive controls are imposed, the number of deaths caused by pollution could be reduced by about 25%. Pollution has been a neglected problem. It has not received anywhere near the level of resource that's required to address it properly. And so our first big recommendation is that dedicated international funding be established to control pollution. The second big recommendation we make is that there be global collection of data. In so many countries around the world, we simply have no data on levels of pollution. We have no data on how many people die each year from the major diseases. Data that we take for granted in this country simply don't exist in many parts of the world. And without good data, it's extremely difficult to track progress and to set benchmarks. The third big recommendation is that countries around the world move rapidly to put in place strong chemical safety policies. Toxic chemicals are pouring into developing countries with little or no controls. And countries around the world need to wake up to this, need to overcome the opposition of powerful vested interests, who of course want no controls on the export of chemicals. And the world badly needs chemical safety policies, because even as air pollution and water pollution come under control, right now chemical pollution is rising uncontrollably and needs to be addressed quite vigorously. I'm cautiously optimistic that countries around the world will succeed in reducing their pollution. I think the best evidence for that comes from high-income countries like the United States, like Western Europe, Japan, Australia. We have greatly reduced our pollution over the past 50 years since EPA was formed in the early 1970s. We've reduced all the major air pollutants by about 70%. We've cleaned up our worst hazardous waste sites. We've reduced our children's blood levels by 90%. Our rivers no longer catch fire. And in the same time as we've done all that, we've increased our gross domestic product, our GDP, by 250%. So the notion that pollution control hinders the economy is simply false. You can control pollution and at the same time grow the economy. It requires being strategic and being smart.